We're hearing from neighbors for the first time who say this is not how they want their neighborhood to be remembered. Others saying that they haven't seen the girl, the 14-year-old girl, outside in years. Now, we do want to add some of the details in this story may be upsetting for some viewers. The death of a 14-year-old girl is sending shockwaves through the Mooresville area.
As stuff like that, people, just ain't right.
According to court documents, Boone County deputies went to a home on Cameo Road. Deputies say they found the girl's body on a foam pad in the bathroom, her body emaciated to a skeletal state. Her mother, Julie Ann Stone Miller, is charged with neglect after her daughter reportedly had an eating disorder, hadn't eaten in months, and her mother allegedly failed to get any medical treatment for more than 4 years.
Me personally, I don't remember seeing her. That's me personally. I know she's just 14 years old, but I don't remember. I couldn't tell you on the first day I saw her, if I ever saw her.
Lawmakers are asking questions, too. Could CPS have helped? Could lawmakers have helped? House Bill 4595 did not make it out of a Senate committee this session. It could have allowed members of the West Virginia Department of Human Services to testify to lawmakers about child abuse investigations if called upon.
I still think some of the communication issues do persist, and I think they've been very reliant for a number of years on just not answering questions and citing confidentiality restrictions as a reason for doing that. However, I really think that we are well within our realm of our duties, that we should be able to get that information.
According to court documents, the grandmother told deputies the girl had not attended school since late 2019 or early 2020. The Boone County Sheriff's Office believes the girl was being homeschooled, but was enrolled in public school at one point. According to a statement from a West Virginia Department of Education spokesperson, they say once homeschooled, state code requires that families submit an assessment or portfolio of their child's learnings in grades 3, 5, 8, and 11. If this is not done, the county is required to follow up.
You know, we see a lot of things and we deal with a lot of things, you know, but sometimes things are pretty rough.
The community doesn't want their entire neighborhood to be remembered for this crime. We reached out to the Boone County School District to see if the 14-year-old victim was enrolled in school or why the county did not check on her if she was homeschooled. We have not heard back. Child Protective Services says confidentiality rules prevent them from saying if they have investigated concerns at the home.
We will beat ourselves up to the day that I die for not kicking that door down and demanding to see her.
Jessica Stone says for years they asked about Kyneddi and claims CPS and law enforcement were asked to check on her. Eyewitness News is working to confirm that information from authorities. There are many unanswered questions right now about this case, and we are pushing for answers on the two biggest being if CPS was ever involved and Kyneddi's status in the public education system. We've filed several Freedom of Information Act requests trying to find out as well.
Eyewitness News starts right now with breaking news.
And we do have breaking news right now. Eyewitness News just confirmed through school records that the 14-year-old girl found dead at her home last week in Boone County, leading to her mother's arrest, was being homeschooled. Now, Kyneddi Miller started homeschooling in February of 2021 at the request of her mother, Julie Ann Stone Miller. The teenager was found emaciated to a skeletal state on April 17th at her home in the Mooresville area. Her mother is now charged with child neglect causing death. Miller emailed former Boone County School Superintendent Jeff Huffman saying it would be best to homeschool Kyneddi due to the COVID-19 pandemic because she is around her elderly grandparents daily. It is not known if Miller submitted homeschool student assessments required under state code. She is due in court Monday for a preliminary hearing.
It's been almost 2 weeks now since 14-year-old Kyneddi Miller was found dead inside her home, where deputies say she was emaciated to a skeletal state. Her 49-year-old mother, Julie Ann Stone Miller, did appear in court today for a preliminary hearing, but the hearing was waived, meaning this case will now go on to a grand jury. This case, though, creating a lot of conversation about safeguards for children who are pulled from school.
Ms. Miller, anything you want to say before you go in there?
Julie Miller arriving to court on Monday for her preliminary hearing in a child neglect case that deputies referred to as shocking. Her teen daughter, Kyneddi Miller, was found dead, extremely malnourished, in a skeletal state. Her grandmother telling deputies Kyneddi had only been outside maybe twice in 4 years and was in poor health, not eating for months. We also confirmed Friday through a Freedom of Information Act request that Kyneddi was homeschooled. Her mother sent in an email in 2021 requesting that Kyneddi be homeschooled due to COVID concerns. This aspect of the case bringing about renewed calls for legislation, especially what's been known as Rayleigh's Law.
And not only do we need to revisit that piece of legislation that we were pushing during regular session, but we need to find a way to enhance it in making sure that nobody's able to slip through the cracks, whether they have a pending investigation or not.
This law that has come up during session for years would allow counties to prevent or delay parents from homeschooling their kids if there is an active or pending child abuse or neglect case against them. It passed the House this year, but was never taken up in the Senate. Though Governor Justice said CPS did not know about this child, family members said concerns about Kennedi's well-being were reported.
The bigger emphasis should be just, again, taking care of our children.
We have also sent in a Freedom of Information Act request to the Department of Human Services requesting CPS data and travel records specific to this case.
Governor Jim Justice taking back a comment that he made 2 weeks ago regarding the death of a Boone County teenager. Now, Justice previously stated that Child Protective Services had, quote, no idea about the case, end quote, where 14-year-old Kyneddi Miller was found emaciated at a home in the Morrisville area. Kennedi's mother, Julianne Stone Miller, has been charged with child neglect causing death. The governor stated today that he had been given incorrect information by the Department of Human Services regarding this case and that it shouldn't have happened, but he had believed it was true at the time.
Will I stand behind what was said 2 weeks ago? Now that I know the information that I know today, no way.
The Cabinet Secretary for the Department of Human Services said yesterday they're meeting their federal requirement for disclosing child death information. But as Anna Saunders explains, for legislators and advocates, these reports are not fulfilling the need for crucial information.
Gina, federal law says that states must develop procedures to release information to the public about deadly cases of abuse and neglect. This includes whether or not there were previous reports of abuse and the services and actions provided by the state. DOHS claims its annual critical incident report does that. And while it does contain some overall data, the answers we have been looking for are not in here. In our Freedom of Information Act requests in the case of 14-year-old Kyneddi Miller, we wanted answers to these questions. Did CPS know about Kyneddi, and did they make any visits or launch any investigations before her death? We were initially told by Governor Justice that CPS did not know her. Yesterday, he went back on that, saying he was told false information.
We've got basically attorneys that are with DHHR and they screw it up.
He then brought on the Cabinet Secretary of the Department of Human Services, Cynthia Priscilli, who said she believes they are fulfilling federal requirements in disclosing information.
That our critical incident report that we provide annually fulfills that federal requirement.
So let's look through the critical incident report from 2023. Here you can see data on location of child abuse and neglect cases, as well as the cause of death, the victims' ages and races, and the age of the perpetrators. But what you won't find, though, is what we have been looking for: information about CPS involvement or awareness in these cases before it got to this point. DOHS has continued to maintain that the media, the public, and lawmakers cannot have this information because it violates confidentiality. Kelly Caseman, the executive director of the data-driven advocacy organization Think Kids, says that this excuse is unacceptable.
You can give us the who, what, where, and when, but the why is the sticking point. The why is what needs to be changed. Why would a 14-year-old girl starve to death? That is something that takes so long and is such a horrible way to die. How did no one intervene?
And that's what Delegate Kayla Young says makes it difficult on lawmakers to make policy when they don't know what's going on from an annual report that comes out a year later.
Not really any information that you need to figure out what we need to change. It's just the pure data breakdown of what happened, and that's to meet a federal requirement. Nothing in that document is giving us any sort of tangible information to pull to make policy changes to make our state safer for our kids. So there's a lot more to do on that front.
Persili did say in yesterday's briefing that they are starting to look at how other states do it. South Carolina, for example, allows for disclosure of information if it's limited to the department's activities in handling the case. States like Arizona give a full detailed report for every child fatality and near fatality. Caseman says it's a start to look at other states, but what she believes will bring about change is when the results of what's going on internally that have nothing to do with the child's personal information are shared with the public.
Our state entity that we fund, who are supposed to be working for us, refuses to give this information to us, and almost it at this point almost feels smug that we don't have a right to this information. We have a right to be outraged, and we have a right to say, this is enough.
A bombshell update to the story we've been following for weeks after a 14-year-old girl was found dead, emaciated to a skeletal state at a home in Boone County. Records that reporter Leslie Rubin just obtained confirmed CPS knew about the teen more than a year ago. She joins us live in the studio with breaking details. Leslie.
Gina, this West Virginia State Police call report confirms without a doubt that someone did call in a welfare check on Kyneddi Miller at her home on Cameo Road in Morrisville on March 9th, 2023, and state police referred the case to Child Protective Services. The next time police would be called to the home 13 months later, she was dead on a bathroom floor. Her body was so emaciated, investigators who were there tell me they're still struggling with what they saw. Now, we've been pressing for answers in this case for weeks from the Department of Human Services, which oversees CPS. They were simple questions like, did CPS ever go to the home and check on Kyneddi Miller? Now, we're talking about a teenager who, by all accounts, hadn't been seen outside of her home for years. A teen who we've discovered was taken out of public school in 2021 by her mother, Julie Miller, who is now charged with her death. A little girl who appeared healthy and happy in pictures like this one that we've been given from other family members from years ago. But then something changed, and sources tell me she truly disappeared and her family did not allow contact with her. Obviously, someone was concerned because these records prove state police went to the home on a welfare check and referred that case to CPS. Here's a clip of audio we just got in response to a Freedom of Information Act request about that call.
I've been out with this resident here, reference at welfare check. Made contact with juvenile that was subject to the check. She appears to be okay, Bree.
10-4 good.
Make a CPS referral on it also, that way they can follow up on it.
But now the major question here, did CPS ever follow up? The agency has been hiding behind its interpretation of a state code that protects juvenile information. Now, if you remember, Governor Jim Justice even came out 2 weeks ago and said CPS had no idea about the girl prior to her death. Then on Wednesday, he took back those comments. He didn't go into detail other than saying attorneys for the agency had, quote, screwed up and given him bad information. Now, we've reached out to the Department of Human Services about what we've uncovered today. We haven't heard a response back, but in the meantime, Julie Miller remains in jail on a $250,000 cash-only bond. But the criminal investigation and now this investigation into who else failed this child is still very much underway. Jerry and Donna Stone were taken away in handcuffs from their home here on Cameo Road in Morrisville early this morning, the home that they used to share with their daughter, Julie Miller, and granddaughter, Kyneddi Miller. 3 people deputies say never got Kyneddi the care that could have saved her life.
Sir, is there anything you want to say?
Jerry Stone walks into the Boone County Courthouse following his wife, Donna.
Do I have anything to do with Kyneddi's death?
The elderly couple now charged in connection with the death of their 14-year-old granddaughter, Kyneddi Miller.
What happened? I'm with the news. We just want to know what happened to her.
Anna Saunders is live in the studio to walk us through the statement and how this all stacks up with other comments made in the fallout of the case. Anna.
Dave, DOHS Cabinet Secretary Cynthia Persili said after a comprehensive search through their records that They never ever received a referral relating to the death of Kyneddi Miller and were never involved in her life. This goes against what the state police report said, that a referral was made. It also creates more questions and confusion about statements from Governor Justice that he previously made about this case as well. The Department of Human Services says in a statement a referral from West Virginia State Police on Kyneddi Miller was never made, despite records from state police that say it was last March.
Leslie Rubin took questions about how this referral fell through the cracks to the governor today. And Leslie, there's a big update tonight about what happened after that welfare check on Kyneddi was performed by state police.
Sources have been telling me that the trooper drove directly to the Boone County DHHR office in Rock Creek after he checked on Kyneddi and made the referral in person. This comes after we uncovered audio and reports that also confirmed that CPS knew or should have known about Kyneddi more than a year before her tragic death that's already led to the arrests of her mother and grandparents for child neglect. Today, the governor claims there's no evidence from DOHS that report was made. On the heels of a blistering statement attacking the press, threatening to prosecute whistleblowers, and doubling down on previous statements that the Department of Human Services was not involved in the life of Kyneddi Miller before her death on April 17th, Cabinet Secretary Cynthia Pursley went on to say she was aware of our reports that, quote, suggest that West Virginia State Police intended to make a referral on this child in March of 2023, but said a search of records suggests no referral was ever made. Today, the first time we've had the opportunity to question the governor about it.
I've been told by numerous sources that the West Virginia State Police trooper who made the welfare check on Kyneddi Miller on March 9th, 2023, drove in his cruiser directly to the DHHR office in Rock Creek immediately following that check and made the CPS referral in person. Have you been made aware of that? Is that true? If so, why has DOHS maintained that no referral was made that day?
Here's what I know. You know, that there's an officer that says that he drove, I guess his personal vehicle or whatever, and he drove to the offices and went in and made that report. At the same time, there's no evidence that I can uncover so far that a report was made.
Justice went on to suggest the trooper could have taken another step beyond going to this Boone County DHS office in person.
I think there's an 800 number in place and everything to where our state police could have reported. So many different things could have happened here, and with this little girl, things absolutely fell through the cracks.
Justice was also questioned about a notice of intent to sue him personally and Attorney General Patrick Morrisey by Disability Rights of West Virginia. It alleges that his office and DHS have knowingly subverted Congress's Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act mandate in order to evade accountability, conceal DHS misconduct, threaten bogus criminal charges, retaliate against the press, and prevent effective systemic reform. I've reached out to state police today for follow-ups to the governor's comments. I have not received a reply. Earlier this week, they said they stood by the information that's been released so far in terms of that audio call and that call report that indicated the trooper made that referral. Now, I've also reached out to DHS with more questions about why they would have no record of the trooper doing so. So far, I've not heard back from them either.
CPS's parent agency, the now Department of Human Services, responded to our questions after the officer's claims surfaced by telling us the only proper way for law enforcement to call them into action was through a phone hotline.
What difference does it make if they made a phone call or tied a note to a rock and threw it through the window of the office? Once the agency becomes aware of what's going on or the need to check what's going on, why didn't they do it?
We have confirmed that his cruiser was in the parking lot.
But questions are still swirling about conflicting statements from CPS, who says that referral was never made. Leslie Rubin is here to show us what she's found. Leslie?
Gina, as the governor urges patience for his office to be able to get a report together from both sides, through a Freedom of Information Act request, I found GPS records that showed the exact path that trooper drove when going to follow up on a call requesting a welfare check on Kyneddi Miller, and where he drove immediately after. Now, while we may never know if CPS or anyone could have saved this child, the governor contends he wants to know who dropped the ball, but continues to question if the trooper actually made that referral.
117 Troop 5.
117, go ahead.
Start me a CAD call, 501 Cameo Road, 501 Cameo Road, Morrisville, reference welfare check.
117 is the unit number for former West Virginia State Police Sergeant C.R. Sutphin, who is now retired. But on March 9th, 2023 at 12:44 in the afternoon, he let dispatchers know he was going to check on a child named Kyneddi Miller at a neighbor's request.
10-4.
New GPS records obtained from state police under the Freedom of Information Act show Sutphin's cruiser was at the home for about 10 minutes before calling back to dispatchers.
I've been out with this resident here, reference welfare check. Made contact with juvenile that was subject to the check. She appears to be okay, break.
10-4, good.
Make a CPS referral on it also. That way they can follow up on it.
10-4, do you want me to clear no report? 117, did you want this cleared with no report?
Yeah, 10-4, there's no report on it. She's okay. I just want to do a CPS referral. Just I have to look at on her.
The GPS shows Sutphin drove directly to this Boone County DHHR office in Foster. He was there for 8 minutes and 12 seconds before checking back in with dispatch with another update.
117, Troop 5.
117.
And you note on that CAD call, reference that welfare check, that I just made that CPS referral. Just put it in the note on it.
Governor Jim Justice continues to cast doubt on whether the trooper went into the office and questioned if actions by the state could have saved the girl a year before her eventual death last month.
We have confirmed that his cruiser was in the parking lot. The people in the building say they don't have any recollection of him being in the building. They don't have any recollection of a report or anything like that.
It's a very interesting hearing, Dave. The Julie Miller's defense attorneys say that the West Virginia Department of Human Services sent a Child Protective Services investigator to South Central Regional Jail to interview Miller yesterday. Now, they also say this was in preparation for a press conference tomorrow set to release information about a report compiled by Governor Jim Justice's offices about how the DOHS and state police handled the case before Kyneddi Miller's death. Now, the judge has ruled that the press conference can take place.
Coverage from every angle from reporters who have been following this story since the beginning. Leslie Rubin and Anna Saunders are standing by right now at the West Virginia State Capitol, where in just hours we're expected to learn a lot more about what steps were taken and were not before Kenneddy's tragic death. Leslie, we'll start with you.
Anthony, there have been two very distinct and separate investigations going on in this case. First, you've got that criminal investigation that you touched on Boone County with the arrests of Julie Miller and Kyneddi Miller's grandparents. And then you've got this separate state investigation that has been ordered by the governor. Anna Saunders has also closely been following this case, and she's going to be at the briefing today. She's been digging into the homeschooling aspect of this story. And Anna, we know in 2021 that Julie Miller pulled Kyneddi out of school to begin homeschooling. What should have happened after that?
Leslie, that's right. We know from state code that from there, her 6th, 7th, and 8th grade year assessment should have come due by last summer. Now, whether or not those were ever turned in, that's still up for debate, because we sent in a Freedom of Information Act request asking for those records. We were told by Boone County Superintendent Matthew Riggs that no public records exist matching that request. We still have not received clarity on if that meant assessments were never turned in or if those are just not records that are able to be shared with the public.
Leslie Rubin and Anna Saunders are live at the state capitol, where state officials announced their findings today. Leslie, let's start with you.
Gina, there is a lot to unpack here, but I really want to start with the things that we have been telling you about for weeks, about that 2023 referral that a trooper says he made after he performed a welfare check on Kyneddi at her home, and then CPS's response that they never got that referral. We now have some clarity on what exactly played out and how that happened. Justice's Chief of Staff Brian Abraham says he believes the trooper did in fact go into that Boone County CPS office and talk to someone about the call he had just been on, checking on Kyneddi Miller. The CPS workers continue to say they have no memory of the conversation, but either way, Abraham says what the trooper reported to them would not have risen to the level of abuse and neglect, and CPS would not have gotten involved. The trooper said Kyneddi was in good health and he didn't have any reason to believe she was being abused or neglected. But he did find it odd because she was so concerned about COVID-19 and said she didn't want to be around any people. He said he was more concerned about her mental health, and he just wanted to relay that information to the CPS workers.
If I were sitting and trying to weigh this with a scale.
We've talked a lot about those assessments that the state says are mandated. And Anna, what did we learn today about those assessments and what could have happened here?
Leslie, we can now say with certainty that Julie Miller, the mother of Kyneddi, never turned in any of the homeschooling assessments that she was supposed to, and that was due last June. Now, this is one area where Brian Abraham said the court could have possibly intervened before her death in April.
Well, a Boone County judge will now decide if the governor's office and Department of Human Services are in contempt of court.
This all comes as a result of information shared with the county prosecutor in the case against Julie Miller. Leslie Rubin broke this story yesterday, and she's here now with what Governor Justice's Chief of Staff is saying today.
Prosecutor Dan Holstein said he's concerned about 6 documents emailed to him from the General Counsel for DOHS. Holstein says he hasn't opened them because he thinks they may be in direct violation of a judge's order in the case. This all goes back to that emergency hearing last week that attorneys for Julie Miller asked for to try and stop the state from having a press conference last Thursday that addressed its findings in a separate investigation into the death of 14-year-old Kyneddi Miller.
This is a very strange situation given the prosecutor for the state is alleging the state could be in contempt of court. So what's going on here? Did your office or DOHS violate a judge's order in sharing that information? And if not, why won't the lawyer for DOHS just respond to him and say that all is good and it's fine and he should open the documents?
I got on a phone call myself personally yesterday with both attorneys and the judge.
In the wake of Kyneddi Miller's death, people continue to call on Child Protective Services for more accountability measures. Today, as Anna Saunders shows us, more than a dozen people gathered in Beckley to do just that.
Somebody was negligent, and somebody, besides just the parents, need to be held accountable.
Each person who spoke had their own personal story about CPS involvement or CPS not showing up when they needed them, but a common theme brought up by all, the apparent starvation death of Boone County teen Kyneddi Miller.
I know cases where CPS has not shown up for weeks or months on end. How can you help somebody if you don't show up? How can you help that child if you don't show up?
She said it's a lack of staffing and training and a lack of accountability from the higher-ups. She said what needs to happen first is public reports on child deaths and details on CPS involvement prior. In the fallout of Kyneddi Miller's death, the Department of Human Services, which houses CPS, said they would start looking at how other states release information. Dorsey said that's an area to address to first see where things are going wrong.
If we don't make that change, they will cover up with their confidentiality. We can't say anything, confidentiality. Well, it's getting our kids killed.
Some say homeschool families are unfairly under attack, and while West Virginia lawmakers have tried to completely do away with any homeschool oversight in the past, others argue now is the time to tighten the loopholes that allow children like Kyneddi Miller to fall through the cracks.
If you ask what could have been done at the state level to protect Kyneddi Miller before her death, you won't get a straight answer.
Whether or not the state police dropped the ball a little bit, the DHHR dropped the ball, the education folks dropped the ball, you know, Absolutely. Everybody, could have done better.
But you will get finger pointing that's led to questions over the state's homeschooling law. By law, homeschool students are required to turn in assessments they take every year to determine academic progress. However, while they're supposed to be taken every year, they're only required to be turned in at the end of the school year in grades 3, 5, 8, and 11. New data from the West Virginia State Department of Education shows only 37% of homeschool families in those 4 grade levels turned in assessments in the last 4 years.
And anecdotally, we have heard that there's a problem getting assessments and getting those collected, but that's basically 1 in 3 is not turning in their assessments.
State Superintendent Michelle Blatt says the numbers were only recently compiled and do come with several caveats. For instance, on the letter of intent sent to counties from parents who make the decision to homeschool, an age is put down as opposed to a grade level. When you look at the bigger picture and factor in all of the more than 32,000 students who were actively homeschooling in the last 4 years, the state says the number drops to just 24% submitting assessments. Blatt says she doesn't think the current law is functioning as it should.
We've got counties that are currently tracking 30% chronically absent students that are in the public schools.